Welcome everyone to Writing as a Nurse, the Methodology paper. I'm Dr. Basil Considine and I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and we are going to delve into Chapter 3, or what becomes Chapter 3 of the Doctor of Nursing Practice final project. At this point in the semester, you're probably familiar with the Writing Center services, so we'll gloss through this. You can find details on it in pretty much any other webinar that we have. Right after this, we do have a webinar EDD in progress, writing about themes and action plans, and you can browse the schedule for all of our upcoming webinars available on the Writing Center website and at the sign up link that you see on the right-hand side. This is part of a much larger series that we have for Writing as a Nurse. We have a growing body of webinars such as this that delve in depth into particular topics or assignments, and we have these sorted and tagged according to the courses that they correspond to. Some have multiple things, so for example, whether you are in our BSN to DNP pipeline or in the standalone DNP pipeline, you will be working on writing your PICO question. And so this comes up in both Nursing 612 and Nursing 701. And it's basically the same assignment, so same webinar for both of them. All right, we have a couple things that you will see me using today. One will be the DMP project template, which you can download along with our course paper template from the link that you see at the top. And if you have to leave for some reason in the middle of the webinar, you can always watch the recording on the Writing Center website or see it when it gets uploaded to YouTube. All right, so we are going to start by reviewing some core terminology that you'll be using when writing about the methodology, when writing your Chapter 3. Then we will delve into Nursing 712's Week 6 methodology paper assignment, and then we'll finish with a hands-on application of the core principles for outlining the assignment to make sure that you are writing everything that you need to, and also not things that you are not required to. So we're all busy people, and I know that our typical student works at least full-time and studies full-time and may have family and other things, so we'll try and be efficient with this. All right, so the term methodology gets used a number of different ways, and it's helpful to understand how it gets used in those different ways depending on the context. So in the very general sense, methodology refers to the system of methods that you use in a particular area of study or activity. Now, more confusingly, when you're talking about a dissertation or a DNP project and other research things, it can be used in a general and in a specific sense. In the DNP project, the general sense means that we're referring to the systematic approach or approaches and activities that you are using to achieve your goals. So in that sense, everything in Chapter 3 could be considered generally under the heading of methodology. But it also gets used specifically to refer to the overall type of research approach that you're using, which is to say qualitative, things that do not reduce to numbers, that are descriptive and often subjective in nature; quantitative, things that we can code and organize and tabulate and hence run statistical analyses on; and mixed methods, which is a combination of the two. And we'll delve into those both in a little bit more later. Now, a related term that is often confused with methodology is research design. And that really is going another grade of specificity above and beyond qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. When someone says, tell me your research design, they don't mean just qualitative, but something like, oh, a qualitative case study, for example. As I mentioned earlier, qualitative research deals with phenomena that can be observed but not measured in quantitative or objective terms, or not easily measured, I should say. Now, quantitative research, on the other hand, deals fundamentally with things that can be counted or described using numbers and other methods of coding. Mixed methods is a combination of the two. Generally speaking, for a DNP project or a doctoral dissertation, unless you have a lot of experience doing this kind of research from your prior professional and educational activities, we will steer you away from mixed methods because it's an awful lot more work and generally unnecessary for the scope of the DMP project. Not saying that you can't do it, but that it will probably take you a bit longer than you need to and then you want to. Some of the common qualitative research designs, case study. This is when you take a instance, a scenario, an example, usually a actual historical one, and you analyze it in detail. Now, how historical it can be depends on the kind of research that you're doing. If you're, say, explaining a model's efficacy, you might want to have a historical case that is documented in great detail and you have access to these things without worrying about patient privacy because they've been dead for a while. But you could also have a case study where you're using very current data addressing a very present issue in the society or workplace around you. And of course, there would be some privacy concerns to come up there, but uh, a single case study allows you to really delve in and try and understand or dissect an issue. Multiple case studies is using multiple sets of case studies to try and draw broader trends or conclusions, usually looking at something in either a set of related settings to show that something is applicable in more than one, or in contrasting things to show the flexibility of whatever it is that you're testing or evaluating or applying. Ethnographic is a term that can get very broad. um, I say this as someone who has a doctoral degree in ethnomusicology, among other things. And ethnography is a study of what people do and how and why they do it, among other things. And it's usually used when you are trying to understand something and there's a lot of that, well, why are they doing it involved? Or why is this how important? Grounded theory is when you're trying to understand a phenomenon and design and to some degree evaluate a theory that explains what's going on. Historical is primarily looking at things retrospectively and is often less focused on, well, let's try and derive actions. It's just, let's just document what's going on. You won't do a lot of purely historic qualitative research in nursing, although there is plenty. It's just usually not done at the DNP project level. Narrative research is trying to highlight the stories of something that's going on. For example, there is a lot of narrative research being conducted right now about healthcare workers during the COVID-19 pandemic, not with the primary focus being, all right, here's what you should do, but to say, hey, it's important for people to know what's going on and let's show what's going on. Let's document all the pressures and the tensions and the trade offs and so forth. And phenomenology is, broadly speaking, you are trying to um, describe a phenomenon in some depth. Now, phenomenology is another one of those research methods, or sorry, it's another one of those research designs that is less common to see done for DMP project. It's not that you can't, but that it is generally just not considered to be in scope, if you will. Now, if you're looking for a research about phenomenology, they'll find a lot of that. Much of it goes about, well, how do we know what we know, or how do we think about that? And so, one of the reasons that it is usually out of scope is that it's really hard to keep your literature review concise when you're doing phenomenology, because usually it's taking lots of little bits from things here and there. Now, on the quantitative side, some of the most common ones are causal comparative, correlational. And so comparative is usually fairly easy for people to understand. Correlational is when you're using statistical analysis to try and show, okay, does this thing seem very linked to this other thing? If this number increases, does this one also change? And is that done to a statistically significant extent? So if you are, say, trying to analyze the efficacy of a procedure and you're doing a retrospective chart review, very likely you're doing a correlational study saying, okay, if this thing happened to someone meeting these conditions, what was the outcome? And how did that change if they got this other treatment, say? Experimental comes in a variety of, we'll say, flavors, going up to things like the true experiment and randomized control trials. But the basic idea is that you are trying to demonstrate the role of something, and to really do that well, you need to have things like a control group and blinding, just to some extent, so that you're minimizing researcher bias. And then the last one, survey, is sometimes referred to as a quantitative light research design, because survey is less on, okay, here's what's going on, and more, okay, here's what people think, or here's what people know as measured by X. And it certainly has its place. It is usually used in this level of research as a precursor step of, okay, so we did a survey and then we use the survey results to design our questionnaire for something. There are other designs for both qualitative and quantitative, but those are the most common. Something else that it's very helpful to review is what the framework is for your research. Now, a framework in a DMP project context is going to be either a theoretical or conceptual framework. Essentially, the framework is the thing you use as a lens or as a filter to determine what you focus on, what you treat as important. If that filter happens to be a theory or a set of theories that are supporting your research and saying, oh, this stuff is very important, then it's a theoretical framework. If it's something else like a model or approach, or you're applying things from a different context entirely, then it's probably going to be conceptual framework. And we have a whole webinar on that. I've included our easy litmus test in case you're on the fence and wondering which one you have. If you have one or two theories, it's a theoretical framework. Three or more that you're using, then it's probably a conceptual framework. But sometimes they'll have, the sub-theories of a master theory. And so it might be on the theoretical framework, even though technically there are three. If you're using models, concepts, or principles, then it's a conceptual framework. And if it's a combination, it's probably going to be a conceptual framework as well. Why is this important? Well, it connects to your research design in an important way, because the framework that you choose determines what you pay attention to and focus on within the larger or general problem that you're studying. And it also guides the specific methodology and the research design too that you select for addressing the specific problem that you're trying to address. And in general, you'll divide the questions you asked into interview questions, which would be questions you ask people, secondary research questions, which are questions that you're asking that you need to answer in order to answer the primary questions. The primary questions are the ones that are trying to deliver meaningful answers and insights into something that your theoretical or conceptual framework and the literature review highlight as being important. So because of that connection, the research questions that you decide that you're going to be answering, those determine the methodological inquiry that you select. So if we're saying, well, okay, is there a statistically significant relationship between this and that? Well, obviously we're going with a qualitative methodology, and so we need to pick a qualitative design appropriate to what we're trying to get. All right, so let's look at the Nursing 712 Week 6 methodology paper. Now, this is coming late in the course, and so it's no surprise that this is building on a lot of stuff that has been done before. So it's going to be a 5 to 7 page paper that discusses the method on how you will conduct your project, and it will essentially be the foundation of chapter 3. Usually there's a little bit of expansion, and that happens after you're done and you get your feedback on this paper, but the idea is that it will become chapter 3 in that final form. And this is building on the material that you wrote in Nursing 701 and Nursing 705. And there is a rather detailed rubric that we should be looking at. So these are just basic instructions about that. And there's an instruction to use the template, so we'll be looking in that later too. And you can see that this is a rather dense bit of text here. And so for ease of reading, I've gone ahead and I've reformatted this with some slight tweaks to the arrangement of it for greater readability. That's what these next slides are showing. So we need to have an introduction, project design, instrument or measurement tools, data collection, analysis plan, etc. Now, I'm going to point out one thing here where this is saying that you must have an introduction to the chapter. Absolutely. Now, when this goes into chapter 3, you will eventually remove that heading introduction because that's what the DNP project handbook says and what the APA manual says, that you should not start a chapter or a paper with the heading introduction. Here, to make sure that you put it in, it's not bad to be working with it right now. So you need the introduction, the project design, to list the instrument or measurement tools that you're using to collect data, state what your data collection analysis plan is with some specific things that you're supposed to mention, describe the overall methodology that you're using, again, answering these specific questions, and describe the feasibility of this, the appropriateness of what you've chosen to answering this, the IRB process, any interprofessional collaboration, describe the project setting, the target population, risk benefit, timeline, and chapter summary. So let's just do a quick snapshot here and look at the high level bullets and see how many we have here. So we have 4, 5, 10, 15. So all told, there are 15 bullets, and this paper is going to be maximum 5 to 7 pages. So this tells me that, roundly speaking, although some of these paragraphs will be shorter than others and some will be longer, roundly speaking, we're talking 2 or 3 paragraphs as per page. And so that means that we're really not going to have much more than 1, max 2 paragraphs per section, because this is going to have to fit in 5 to 7 pages of main body content. So this is one of the reasons you want to be very careful about following the rubric. Make sure you state all the things that you need to at no more, no less, and then you see where you are space-wise. That this will save you a lot of time and trouble because you make sure that you get the things that you need said first, and then you can worry about making a nice extra introduction and things like that. And I think you'll agree with me that this outline form that I've presented here is a bit easier to read than this rather dense table here. All right, there are a couple other things we need to track here. One of which is the paper formatting. This is the last item in the rubric, to say that it should be no more than 7 pages of content. So the cover page, the table of contents, and references, that basically the front matter and the back matter are not counted. It's just the body of your paper should be no more than 7 pages. The rest is pretty standard. Follow APA formatting, 12-point Times New Roman font, double spacing, etc., etc. Make sure that you format this so it looks and reads clearly. All right, so let's get started here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab a copy of our DNP project template. This is what the instructions say you should be using. Essentially, by using the same document that this will end up in as a chapter, you will save yourself a lot of time and trouble later on making sure that the formatting matches and everything. So let me take a moment and grab that. So you can go ahead and download this from the course website or from the ACU Online Writing Center. The most current version is always going to be on the ACU Online Writing Center website because I maintain that file. And then we update the courses periodically. So if you want the latest, greatest, go on to the ACU Online Writing Center website. And I'll go ahead and share that in the chat room for you. All right, so I have a copy of the DNP project template. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen, and I'd ask that you let me know that you can in fact see this, because sometimes the sharing takes a little while to kick in. All right, you should now be seeing a copy of the APA course paper template here. So do let me know if that's not the case. All right, and a couple things here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier to read here. So notice that it comes with a variety of comments here. And one of the things to keep in mind is that if you've used a template before and you just want to get a clean copy, there's a quick way to do that. Go to Review. This is on the ribbon here. Home, Insert, etc. Review. Go to Review, and if you select Delete all comments and document, then you end up with a clean copy very quickly, and you don't need to worry about hunting those down across the paper. All right, so one of the things the instruction says is that you should fill in the material that you're going to be submitting and leave chapters 1 and 2 blank to put in TBD. So that's all right. We're going to go and head down to chapter 2 here, chapter 1 and chapter 2. And because of the placeholder nature, we're just going to select all of this for now and replace that with TBD. Now, eventually, and probably right after you submit this paper, you will want to go in and update your draft by pasting in the papers that you wrote in 701 and 705 to take the place of chapter 1 and chapter 2. But for now, the instructions say just put in TBD, so do that. Also, if you're submitting your draft to the Writing Center for feedback, if you just have those TBD placeholders there, that'll prevent us from getting distracted and giving you feedback that you weren't looking for on those chapters at that time. Now, something you can absolutely do is to work on those chapters after you finished your paper for this class. But right now, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to start with pasting actually materials from the outline I provided. Now, if you have RSVP'd for this webinar, you're automatically on our mailing list and you will receive a copy of the slide deck. And you can just copy and paste from that slide deck into your Word document. If you are not on the list, and you'll know you're on the list if you received an email from me earlier this afternoon saying, hey, you RSVP'd for this, then you can just type your email address in the chat room, and then we will add you to the list that receives this. So I'm just going to start pasting from my outline here, and we'll go slide by slide here because it's broken up nicely into different bullets. And then we will look at how you might organize this and some of the things that would go into each of these sections. Now, it looks like a lot of stuff, but I think it's always helpful to remember that this is a list of the things that you need to have. It's a punch list, and because it's a punch list, it lets you check off and say, okay, they need this, they need that, done, done, done. So let's talk about some of the headings here, because if you go to the table of contents, and you'll see that there's some headings that are in there already. And one of the reasons why you might want to be using the template now, besides it being an instruction and a requirement for this course, is because that allows you to use certain pre-made formatting things here. I'm just going to remove this bolding here for the moment. And so one of those things that comes up is, well, how do you get a heading into the table of contents? And the answer is we apply a style. So I'm on the home ribbon, and then scrolling to the side here, you can see that I have these styles here and then the button styles pane. If you've got a smaller laptop, you might have a little button here to pop that open, but I open up the styles pane, and then I've selected the text that I want to turn into a heading. So what should my first level be? Well, this chapter 3, that is an APA level 1 heading. So we're going to make the first one a level 2 heading, because hierarchically the 2 comes after 1. Same thing with project design, instrument and measure tools, data collection and plan analysis. And then at this point, we'll scroll down to methodology, add that one. And I could go ahead and select all these at once and turn them into the right headings. All right, almost done. So you can see this is just taking me a couple minutes to set up. All right, now if I go back up to the table of contents, I can right-click on this, or control-click if you're on a Mac with only one mouse button, and select Update Field. And you'll see that all of those headings that I added now automatically show up here with the page there. Something that may come up when you have a very short heading here. So this is small enough that Microsoft Word doesn't realize that it's the full text there. So you can just put your cursor here and hit Tab. And you can see it now all lines up. So just a simple thing if you have a short heading like risks. Now, one way around that is to go ahead and say, well, okay, can I be more specific about risks, and say risk to participants, as opposed to say risk to researcher, which can come up in some settings, but hopefully not in this one here. And if that's the case, then you can go ahead and expand that heading, and then you won't have to do that step. All right, now after this, I just hit enter, and it automatically sets things up to write a normal paragraph. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill things in there. All right, for this next stage, I would love a suggestion from one of the attendees. I'm requesting volunteer for give me some ideas for what I should write about for examples here. So give me a topic and give me a problem here. All right, so we have a comparative case study. Okay, so comparative case study is a type of multiple case study design where, as the name says, we are comparing things in different case studies. Now, one of those big questions will be, okay, well, how are we doing a meaningful comparison? And this is one of those reasons why there's usually, not always, but usually some sort of quantitative process going on here. For example, if you were tabulating themes that respondents and comparing them at different workplaces, so you have these lists that you're comparing. Now that's not like statistical things, because it's hard to compare case studies is unless you are cherry picking the data, which is other issues. But you do want to say, okay, well, we came up with a list from this, and so we can compare the list between these two. So you'd write something like this: project utilizes a qualitative, comparative case study design to investigate, and then state whatever you're looking at. And then you follow up with additional details here about how this will be conducted and why this is appropriate for them. and give us the rationale. And then you can do the reverse. You're talking about about the reasons why this particular design is appropriate for what you're doing, and then talk about why other things were not appropriate. Now, the instrument or measurement tool, whether you're using one that someone else created, because, probably because it's available and has been validated, or whether you're developing your own, this is where you describe what you're using and why. If it's a particular tool that has a long history of usage, and that, tell us a little bit about it. Don't go all the way into literature review chapter level of detail, but state, oh, you use this, and why is it appropriate, and why perhaps something else wasn't. So, for example, you might use something because it's being validated with this population or in this type of workplace. The data collection analysis plan. So this is saying, all right, so what sorts of data are you gathering and how are you going to make sense of it? For example, if you're gathering quantitative data, you are probably going to be doing some sort of statistical analysis of it. And so tell us, what kinds of tests you're going to be using. And then what will you use to determine whether it's a meaningful effect or not? Now, if you're doing, say, your standard statistical analysis, we're probably looking at, okay, so what's the p-value going to be, and what is recommended for this in the literature? How does this? Are you looking for the same level as recommended by someone else, or as found by someone else, or things like that? So we have a checklist of the things that you should be doing or describing, and this includes making sure that you are grounding it in the literature, uh, that you're following what has been done before and aligning your research with that. Now, for the DMP project, uh, many of these things involve taking specific actions that are designed to change or influence behavior or outcomes. And so, if your intervention is, say, an educational presentation, you will be describing this here. And then this leads into, okay, well, how does this align with the particular methodology that you've chosen? Because if you are, say, trying to make employees happier or more satisfied with their job or reduce attrition, you want to make sure that the actions are aligning with how you've chosen to approach this. If you're not measuring things after you do the intervention, then it's hard to tell whether it works. So, these have to be in alignment. And so, in this sense, methodology is being used here in more of a general sense of, okay, how are you going about doing this? How is your project proceeding? So, you might understand methodology here as being used in its general sense to mean, give me a breakdown of what your project will do. A table is very helpful. I'll just say that if you are adding a table, make sure that it is following APA style guidelines, which is to say it should look like this. And if you've been in the program for a while or learned APA 6th edition first, do be aware that the formatting for tables and figures has changed a little bit. Just going to type in some placeholders here. All right, so we select the table, and then I'm going to right click or control click if you're on a Mac and select borders and shading. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off all the borders, like so. Next thing, I'm going to go back and go to borders and shading, and I'm going to turn on borders for the top and the bottom of the selection. Then I select the header row, just the header row, same thing, and I turn on the bottom border there. So you'll see what we end up is, this table only has 3 horizontal lines. It is a line above and below the header row, that's the row at the top, and a line below the very bottom row of data. That table 1, table 2, etc., that gets bolded here. The name of the table gets italicized, and then again, we have just those 3 horizontal lines in the table. All right, now the description here happens to be written in past tense because that's what it will ultimately be in chapter 3. For this assignment, you haven't done it yet, so you'll be using future tense, and you'll say XYZ will be used as. So just be aware of that for tense consistency, that it's clear what has been done or hasn't been done at this stage. Feasibility, tell us what makes this manageable. So say if you plan to recruit 200 subjects, that's a lot. But if you work with, let's say, an average of 200 an average of 200 patients per week, you're giving yourself 6 months to work on this. Did I say 200 patients per week? That's too much. Let's say if you work with 20 patients a week and you give yourself 6 months, and in a pilot study, you already had half the people agreeing to sign up. Yeah, that's reasonable here. Or you may be offering a financial incentive that makes more likely that people will participate. Whatever it is, give us there. The IRB process, this section is pretty straightforward. Okay, tell us, what's the expected classification? When are you applying? Tell us explicitly what will and won't happen before you get IRB approval. And the short answer is that should always be, you shouldn't be collecting data for the study until you have that IRB approval, whether it's your research being ruled exempt or whether you're receiving a formal approval. All right, interprofessional collaboration. Are you working with a site mentor? Is there a PI at the project site who is collaborating with you? Whatever it is goes in here. Project setting, tell us about where this DMP project is taking place. This is often a workplace that people are familiar with, if not their own workplace, so tell us the key details here. If you are, say, recruiting a planned 12 people and it's a clinic of 30, that's a fairly large portion of it. So that's the kind of detail that can make a big difference. Or, if it's in a geographically isolated location. If you're trying to make generalizations about nurses in Houston, you're probably going to want a pretty large sample. If we're going to be making a generalization about, let's say, Orange, Texas, just not that far from Houston, but Orange, Texas is a much smaller place. And so if you're trying to make meaningful conclusions about the nurses there, well, there just aren't as many. So you don't need as many to really get a representative sample size. Speaking of which, the section here, target population and sample. These are two things that are often confused. So the target population, these are the larger group that you're trying to recruit from. The sample is the set of people that you actually recruit, that you actually end up getting data from. And so one number is probably going to be smaller than the other. It's very rare to get 100% participation on something just because of the realities of doing research and people's life schedules and everything. But make sure you go through these prompts here and tell us how these not just these bare facts, but also relate that back to, okay, why is this appropriate for your project. It might be something where your project is based on something you observed in this very setting, in which case, great, tell us more about that. Risk is about risk to the participants, and if there is a risk to you as a researcher, mention that. I'm reminded of a preceptor of mine who wanted to do research in the United Kingdom at these big, giant, thoroughly illegal and unauthorized raves that are just held out in the fields. And one of the things he had in his IRB application, well, this is a unregulated thing. There's a lot of drug taking and stuff like that, and that was actually a case where he ended up having to revise his research proposal because the IRB said, we don't think this is safe for you. We can't sign off on that. Come back and come up with another design. And so he did that, came up with something that reduced the potential risk. Benefits. So this is one of those things where you want the potential benefits to balance the risks. We don't want to go and randomly shock people with electricity just to see what happens. If there's something that suggests that there's a high likelihood of a good outcome from that, that would be a benefit, and we'd use that to balance against the risk. But please don't go around shocking people. All right, timeline. This is fairly straightforward. I would just use the list tool, the numbered list tool in Word to do this up. Some people include it in the chapter. Some people put it in the appendix. You can see that the instruction allows both. I would just put it in the chapter inline here because then it's very easy to see and for your instructor to check off. And this should just walk through, okay, what happens in the order that it happens with specific as you can. It doesn't need to be exact days, but if you're like, okay, well, week 1 of the study, I'll do X. Week 2, I'll do that. And if you have a planned start date, like, we will start collecting data on this day because it's after we expect to hear back from the IRB. And then you have, all right, so November 1st will be week 1, November 8th will be week 2, start, so on and so forth. So put those in. And then the chapter summary is really easy to do. That people usually have no problem. That's, okay, so let's recap what we described here and larger points. And it's a counterpart to the introduction. So the introduction is briefly introducing your study and briefly outlining the major points of, okay, this is such and such a type of study. In our case, qualitative comparative case study design. And we're using this to try and find out X. So that is really what you have to do. It looks like a lot of stuff, but it's actually not, because of the 22 pages we're looking at here, that most of that is stuff for the template. The front matter, the cover page, the references and stuff. You are building on stuff you've done before. You've probably cited many of the sources earlier in your lit review, so that makes it easier to assemble your references. And then for the rest, well, you go ahead and answer the prompt. And if you do that with 1 or 2 paragraphs each, then you will very quickly find that you have written the 5 to 7 pages required. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you for attending this webinar, and we will see you again next semester. Good night.